Selena Brooks was not just a rising star, she was a force. At 32, she had already become the principal architect at Halden plus Gray, one of the most respected design firms in the world. The building she had spent nearly 2 years developing, codenamed Eclipse, wasn't just an architectural marvel. It was a declaration of a new era, carbon-neutral community, integrated and visually iconic. Now, after endless late nights, renderings, revisions, and rounds of boardroom negotiations, Selena was flying to London to present her final pitch to an elite panel of global investors. This was the culmination of everything she had worked for, and she intended to arrive in full command of her vision. Her seat 2A first class. Not a luxury, but a line item in her contract. She wasn't there for comfort, she was there for clarity, rest, and presence. Everything she wore and carried reflected the deliberate confidence of her role: a tailored navy blazer, gold-trimmed notebook, and a quiet power that needed no announcement. But at 35,000 feet, design and credentials didn't shield her from the oldest judgment in the book. As she settled in, a woman in her 60s, Margaret Ellingson, approached with barely concealed disdain. Dressed in wealth and entitlement, Margaret accused Selena of occupying her seat. She didn't ask. She insisted. As the flight attendant hesitated, caught between pleasing a frequent flyer and respecting protocol, Selena was forced into a public test of grace and dignity. Her identity, her right to be there, was questioned, not because of a clerical error, but because of who she was. What started as a routine flight turned into a confrontation with deeply rooted prejudice. But what no one on that plane realized, not Margaret, not the crew, not the onlookers, was that Selena Brooks wasn't just another passenger. She was the architect of their future, and her quiet strength was about to rewrite the rules, starting right there in seat 2A. Selena tightened her grip on the leather-bound notebook resting on her lap. Her gaze stayed level, expression unreadable, but beneath the surface a storm was rising. She had encountered prejudice before, of course. It came in subtle looks during boardroom meetings, in dismissive nods from older male executives, in emails where she was mistaken for an assistant. But never had it been so raw, so public, so humiliating. Margaret Ellingson stood tall beside her arms, crossed over her pearl-buttoned blazer, radiating the kind of icy confidence that only came from decades of unchallenged privilege. Her voice cut through the cabin like static. "This is my seat," she insisted. "There must be some mistake." Selena didn't flinch. "No mistake," she replied, calm and firm. "My boarding pass clearly says 2A. You're in 2B." The nearby passengers looked up from their champagne and tablets. The quiet luxury of the first-class cabin now hummed with tension. It wasn't the words, it was the way they were delivered. Margaret hadn't said, "Excuse me." She had said, "Explain yourself." She hadn't asked a question. She had delivered a verdict. The young flight attendant, whose name tag read Ben, approached with forced politeness and a hint of panic in his eyes. "Ladies, is there a problem here?" Margaret turned to him immediately as if he were her personal assistant. "Yes, this young woman is in my seat. Please have her moved. I always sit in 2A. You people know that." Selena raised an eyebrow slightly. "You people?" Ben hesitated. "May I see your boarding passes?" Selena opened her phone and presented her digital pass without a word. Ben looked, blinked, then turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Ellingson, it appears your seat is 2B. Margaret didn't move. She didn't even look at the seat next to Selena. Instead, she gave a short, dismissive laugh. "That's clearly a glitch. I don't know how she got this ticket, but I'm sure she didn't pay full fare." Selena felt the jab land. The implication was clear: you don't belong here. You couldn't have afforded this. You must have gotten lucky or lied. Ben was unraveling. He shifted his weight between his feet, glancing nervously at the other passengers. "Perhaps, Mom," he turned to Selena, "we could reseat you just temporarily while we sort this out." Selena's voice was low, steady, and steel-edged. "No, this is my seat, and I have nothing to sort out. If Mrs. Ellingson believes there's an error, she's welcome to speak with the gate agent after she sits in the seat that matches her boarding pass." Ben opened his mouth, but Margaret cut him off. "I feel unsafe," she said sharply with exaggerated offense. She's being aggressive? There it was, the magic word. Selena saw it happen in real time. Ben's spine stiffened. His demeanor shifted. The tone of customer service hardened into containment. The tension in the cabin crystallized. Mom Ben said to Selena, "I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. This isn't a request, or it's for the comfort and safety of our passengers." Selena blinked slowly. Comfort and safety. She had spoken in full sentences. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't moved. But somehow she had become the threat. Her pride burned hot in her chest, but she didn't lash out. That's what they wanted. That's what people like Margaret depended on, emotional missteps to justify their own small-minded cruelty. Selena leaned back slightly in her seat, her tone glacial. "Let me be clear," she said. "You are threatening to remove me from a seat I paid for, a seat I am assigned, because another passenger who doesn't want to sit beside me made an accusation without evidence, and you're choosing to act on it." Ben's jaw tightened. "I'm following protocol." "No," Selena replied. "You're following fear." The tension was suffocating now. Everyone was watching. No one was intervening. Eyes shifted to windows. AirPods went back in. It was easier not to see, not to care. Then, without warning, a new voice entered the scene. Calm, confident, and commanding. "That won't be necessary." All heads turned. From the front of the aircraft, a man in his late 50s stepped into the aisle. He wore a charcoal gray sweater over a collared shirt, dark trousers, and no airline badge. His salt and pepper hair was neatly cut, his presence casual but unmistakably powerful. Ben froze. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Margaret looked up, eyes narrowing in confusion. "And who are you supposed to be?" The man didn't answer her. He looked directly at Ben. "What's happening here?" he asked. Ben fumbled for words. "Mr. Brooks, there was a seating confusion. This passenger was being difficult." The man raised his hand. "No, don't lie. I saw everything. I've been standing here for 3 minutes, listening." He turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Ellingson, your seat is 2B. You are not entitled to any other seat on this aircraft, no matter how many times you've flown it." And Selena Brooks, he turned back to the woman in seat 2A, his eyes softening, "is my daughter." Dead silence. A thud echoed in the cabin. It was the sound of Margaret's world crashing into the floor. Ben looked like he had been struck. Color drained from his face as the truth took shape before him. David Brooks, Global Airways CEO, had just revealed the very passenger he tried to evict was not only right, but family. Selena didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her father turned back to Ben. "You will apologize. Then you will remove yourself from this aircraft, effective immediately." Ben stammered. I was just trying to manage the situation." "No," David interrupted. "You were trying to appease a wealthy bigot, and in doing so, you almost humiliated the person this airline is most proud to carry. You failed your training, your company, and your own integrity." Margaret finally found her voice. "This is outrageous. I've flown with this airline for 20 years. I am a valued client. And now David said you're a blacklisted one. You are banned from all Global Airways flights permanently." The cabin burst into hushed whispers. Phones discreetly tilted upward. The moment had gone from drama to legend. Margaret tried to protest, but no one was listening. The lead flight attendant quietly escorted her away, face flushed with embarrassment. David sat down in seat 2B beside his daughter. He didn't speak at first, just placed a gentle hand on hers. "You okay?" he asked. Selena nodded. Her lips quivered slightly, but her pride remained unshaken. "Thank you," she whispered. "You shouldn't have needed saving," he said, his voice low. "But I'm here, and I always will be." She smiled faintly, turning to look out the window as the plane finally pushed back from the gate. Outside, the sun had begun to rise. Selena barely had time to breathe before the storm hit. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, a ripple of activity had already begun on the ground. In seat 3C, a young tech entrepreneur named Aaron Fielding had done what so many do without thinking. He pulled out his phone and hit record when things started to escalate. From the moment Margaret Ellingson raised her voice to the second David Brooks appeared, like a ghost of karma, past Aaron caught every word. He hadn't meant to stir up controversy. At first he thought it was just a strange moment worth saving for his private story archive. But when David dropped the words, "That's my daughter," and the entire cabin gasped in silence. Aaron knew this was something else. He uploaded the video from the plane's onboard Wi-Fi before they even crossed the Atlantic. The caption read, "Airline CEO shuts down racist passenger trying to kick his daughter out of first class." Karma lands at 35,000 left. Within 20 minutes, it had 50,000 views. By the time the plane touched down at Heathrow, it had 2.3 million. Selena had no idea. She was met at the gate by two executive service reps, all smiles and crisp uniforms, ushering her into a private lounge with a glass of sparkling water and a small handwritten note from her father. "You were flawless. Proud doesn't begin to cover it." Dad, as she settled in, her phone buzzed violently. One notification, then 10, then 100. Friends, colleagues, reporters, even an old professor from her grad school days who never quite remembered her name now sent, "Is this really you?" She opened her inbox, then Twitter, then CNN. It was everywhere. Her face, the confrontation, the moment her father stood up, the way she didn't back down. Every frame dissected, praised, memified. There were gifs of her calmly saying, "You're following fear." Hashtags exploded across platforms. Miash, seat 2A, Near, architect of change, Miash. Flying while black, Miash. Selena speaks people weren't just reacting, they were rallying. Overnight, Selena Brooks became a national symbol of grace, under pressure of quiet resistance, of dignity in the face of privilege. Back in New York, Margaret Ellingson's morning started very differently. She hadn't even gotten out of bed when her phone began buzzing. At first, she ignored it, but by the seventh call from her husband's assistant, she knew something was off. She reached for her tablet and opened the news. Her face stared back at her from every headline. Racist socialite kicked off plane by airline CEO after publicly humiliating his daughter. Caught on camera, power privilege and a first-class breakdown. Ellingson Group faces backlash over founders' disgraceful mid-flight behavior. Margaret's face paled. Her hand trembled as she opened the video. Watching herself, snarling, smug, seething, was like an out-of-body experience. That wasn't her. That was a manipulated version. A trap. But it wasn't. It was exactly what had happened. Unfiltered, unforgiving. Her assistant called again. This time she answered. "Margaret, you need to call Julian. Now." Julian Ellingson, her son and CEO of Ellingson Group, was pacing inside their corporate offices in Midtown Manhattan. Unlike his mother, he had seen the video within 15 minutes of it being posted. His inbox had collapsed under the weight of angry clients, activists, shareholders, and board members demanding an emergency meeting. Worse still, the Eclipse project. That one contract was supposed to save their firm. The architectural masterpiece Selena had designed wasn't just a structure. It was their Hail Mary. And Margaret had just tried to publicly disgrace the one person holding the keys. When his mother finally called, Julian didn't scream. He didn't curse. He just sighed like something inside him had quietly broken. Meanwhile in London, Selena sat with a cup of tea in her hotel suite, listening to voicemail after voicemail. Most were from reporters, some from activists, one even from Viola Davis' team requesting permission to option her story for a screenplay. Selena laughed softly. A screenplay, I'm just trying to sleep. But sleep was elusive. As much as the public rallied behind her, the internal weight of the incident still sat heavy in her chest. She thought of the silent faces in first class, the people who watched and said nothing, the ones who looked away. It wasn't just Margaret that hurt, it was the absence of collective courage. And yet something bigger was shifting. She could feel it. Her father knocked gently and entered with 2 coffees and a smile. "You've seen the internet?" She nodded. "Is it too late to disappear into the wilderness and live off the grid?" He chuckled. "Only if I can come with you." They sat quietly for a while. The media storm swirled outside. But inside that room it was just a father and daughter, both stunned by what the world had witnessed. "I didn't mean for it to become this," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "But sometimes the moment finds you." She looked at him. "What do I do now?" David leaned back thoughtful. "You lead." Within 48 hours, Eclipse was on the cover of Forbes. But not because of steel beams or Ecoglass. It was on the cover because of Selena Brooks. Because a black woman sitting in her rightful seat, refusing to move, had become the most powerful image in America that week. Julian Ellingson called. apologized, begged. Selena listened, then laid out new terms. Public apology, formal DEI audit, mandatory restructuring. He said yes to everything. He didn't have a choice. She didn't do it for revenge. She did it to set a new precedent, one that wouldn't just repair damage but rebuild expectations. By the end of the week, Margaret Ellingson had resigned from the Ellingson Group to focus on personal reflection. But the damage was done. Her social calendar emptied overnight. The same circles she once ruled now whispered her name like a cautionary tale. The real win, however, wasn't the fall of a name. It was the rise of a movement. Selena launched a nonprofit within weeks, the 2A Initiative, aimed at mentoring young women of color in STEM and design. Donors flooded in. Architectural firms offered internships. Universities called to invite her to speak. She declined most of the spotlight. That wasn't why she stood her ground. But she accepted the responsibility that came with visibility. She toured schools. She mentored girls who had never seen someone like them in such rooms. She showed them what it meant to occupy space unapologetically. Back at Halden Pluck, Gray, her firm released a statement of full support, then asked her to join the board. Months passed. Eclipse broke ground. Investors praised her vision. Communities welcomed the project as a symbol of possibility. Selena never bragged. She never gloated. But one morning, standing on the construction site with a hard hat tucked under her arm, she looked up at the future being built out of concrete and clarity, and she smiled. Because she didn't just build structures, she built standards. And for the first time in a long time, the sky looked wide open. Selena Brooks sat in the back of a black car staring out at the quiet morning streets of Washington, D.C. The sun had barely crept above the horizon, casting soft gold over the rows of white marble monuments and tree-lined avenues. But her mind was far from calm. Today wasn't just another day. Today she was scheduled to deliver the keynote speech at the National Forum on Equity and Leadership, in an annual summit attended by CEOs, lawmakers, scholars, and civil rights leaders from across the country. Normally she would have declined. She was, after all, an architect, not a politician, not a pundit. Her work lived in blueprints, in renderings, and silent beams of glass and steel. But the world had other plans. After the viral incident on global airways, Flight 227, Selena had become more than a name in her field. She had become a symbol of grace, dignity, and the quiet power of saying, "I belong here." And symbols, as she had learned, don't get to stay silent. The invitation came from the White House Diversity Council. It was followed by dozens of others: Harvard, the AIA National Convention, the United Nations Urban Equity Summit. Suddenly, people wanted her voice as much as her vision. They didn't just want to see her buildings. They wanted to hear what she believed. For weeks she had hesitated. Was she ready to be more than a designer? Was she ready to be a voice? The car pulled up to the venue, the Reagan Conference Center. Press vans were already outside. Protesters lined the sidewalks, not protesting her, but inequality, redlining, legacy admissions, zoning bias. She felt their energy, their pain, their hope. Inside aides escorted her to a green room. There was water-soft lighting and a small monitor showing the speaker currently on stage, a Fortune 500 CEO, discussing shared responsibility and forward vision. Selena watched for a moment, then looked down at her notes. She had rewritten this speech 6 times, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew exactly what it needed to mean. She didn't want applause. She wanted awakening. At 10:35 a.m., she stepped onto the stage. The room was packed, more than 2,000 people, many of them standing. Cameras from C-SPAN and 3 major networks were trained on her every move. As the applause settled, Selena adjusted the mic, smiled briefly, then spoke. "My name is Selena Brooks. I design buildings. But today I'm here to talk about the ones we can't see." She paused. The ones made of silence, of assumptions, of power structures we call tradition. The room was still. I never wanted to go viral. I didn't wake up that morning planning to challenge anyone. I wanted to get on a plane, fly to London, and pitch a project I had poured nearly 2 years of my life into. Instead, she continued, I became someone else's version of a mistake. A few heads nodded. I was told, subtly then explicitly, that I didn't belong, that my presence disrupted someone's sense of comfort. But comfort, when built on exclusion, is not peace, it's privilege. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. And when my father, the CEO of the airline, revealed who I was, suddenly everything changed. Not because the facts had changed, not because I had spoken louder, but because power had entered the room and said she matters. Her voice stayed calm, measured, but every word landed like an iron bell. Let me be clear. That moment shouldn't have required a CEO. It shouldn't have required a camera. It shouldn't have required proof of lineage or accomplishment. I deserved to be there because I was there. Applause erupted. She held up a hand. And here's the truth: we've all built invisible structures. We've inherited rules and systems that reward familiarity over fairness, legacy over merit, comfort over courage. She stepped forward. If we truly want equity in leadership, in design, in finance, in education, then we have to rebuild. And not just renovate, rebuild from the foundation. Then came the line that would echo across the country. Dignity is not earned, it is recognized. And if you don't recognize it in others, you've already lost your right to it. The room exploded. When she walked off stage, the standing ovation lasted a full minute. That night, her speech led the national news. The New York Times ran the headline, "Selena Brooks delivers the blueprint for change." Social media was flooded with praise. But something deeper began to happen. Local school boards started referencing her speech. Corporations began reviewing their executive pipelines. Architecture programs reached out to request collaboration on curriculum for marginalized students. The 2A initiative, Selena's nonprofit, saw a 200% increase in donations in 72 hours. But not everyone was cheering. There were detractors, of course. Pundits who accused her of playing the race card. Anonymous trolls who questioned her credentials. A national columnist who wrote, "We're applauding a woman for sitting in a seat she paid for." That's not heroism, that's basic economics. Selena didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because the real answers were being built in foundations, in job offers, in admissions essays that now began with, "I saw a woman named Selena Brooks stand her ground." 1 week later, she received a handwritten letter. It was from Margaret Ellingson. The writing was sharp, almost too precise, like someone trying too hard to sound composed. It was 3 pages long. "I can't undo what I said," Margaret wrote. "I can't erase how I looked at you. But I see now what I refused to see then, that I didn't just disrespect you. I disrespected something much larger than either of us." Selena folded the letter. She didn't reply. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Clarity was. A few months passed. Selena returned to work full-time at Halden plus Gray, now serving as an executive partner and advisor for ethical design. The Eclipse Tower was rising quickly, over 40 stories complete. It was being hailed as the conscience of the Skylinea structure that represented progress not only in engineering, but in ethics. Her name was now etched into award scholarships and urban policy documents. The phrase "the Selena Clause" was being used in corporate circles to refer to anti-discrimination protocols triggered by real-time bias. But fame, as always, came at a cost. She missed anonymity, the days when she could walk into a coffee shop without someone whispering. She missed designing without having to explain herself. She missed being an architect first and a symbol second. Then one day, a 16-year-old girl named Danny Wells walked up to her at a public lecture. She was quiet but confident, dressed in a navy blazer that looked too big for her shoulders but perfect for her posture. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "applying to the University of Michigan for architecture. Your video is why." Selena smiled, stunned. "Really? Yes." Danny nodded. "Because before that, I didn't know people like us could even sit in those rooms, much less design them." Selena didn't cry, but something inside her broke, and something else healed. That night, she called her father. "I think I'm ready," she said, "for what to stop running from what I've become." The next morning, Selena accepted an offer to join the National Council on Equity in Infrastructure, serving as a policy advisor. She wouldn't just design cities anymore. She would help write the rules that governed who got to build them. From that day forward, her life changed again. She spoke less to media and more to mayors. She spent weekends visiting schools in underfunded districts. She sat on panels with secretaries of transportation and economic development. She didn't become a politician. She became something rarer, a quiet architect of public transformation. 2 years after the flight that changed everything, Selena stood in front of the finished Eclipse Tower. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was elegant and understated. Her speech was short, but one sentence lingered in the air. May this building remind us the higher we go, the more grounded we must remain in justice, in design, and in each other. The crowd applauded. At her side stood Danny Wells, now a freshman architecture student. She had interned on the project assisting with interior flow modeling and shadow path simulations. She had earned it. Selena looked at her with quiet pride. The seat I fought to keep became the reason you walked in the door, she thought. That night, as lights danced across the glass facade of Eclipse, and news outlets aired retrospectives about Selena's journey, a single quote flashed across the screen. She didn't ask for power. She asked for respect. And the world gave her both. David Brooks. Selena Brooks never set out to be a revolution, but revolutions don't always announce themselves with fire and fury. Sometimes they arrive as quietly as a woman refusing to move from a seat she paid for. And from that moment, something shifted, not just in the air, not just online, but in boardrooms, classrooms, and blueprints across the country. It started in the places you'd least expect. The American Institute of Architects AIA called an emergency internal summit 3 weeks after Selena's speech in Washington. Not because of PR pressure, but because young professionals were demanding real change. Dozens of Black and brown interns submitted an open letter. We're not asking to be included. We're asking to stop being excluded. The AIA issued a landmark policy the following month, the Brooks Mandate. It required every firm certified under their leadership development track to establish equitable pay audits, DEI training led by external agencies, and publicly published mentorship outcomes disaggregated by race and gender. It was controversial. It was overdue. Selena's name wasn't mentioned in the policy, but everyone knew where the roots began. In the corporate world, similar waves rippled. 4 Fortune 500 companies that partnered with Ellingson Group restructured their diversity councils. One major conglomerate, Antera Holdings, added a Selena standard clause to all new contracts with subcontractors and vendors, requiring not just non-discrimination pledges, but proof of systemic accountability. Meanwhile, venture capital firms began quietly shifting how they funded infrastructure startups. Firms led by women and people of color saw record-high first-round funding approvals. Selena hadn't asked for this, but her presence in the national conversation made it clear the old system wasn't just unfair, it was inefficient. The real surprise came from education. Within 6 months, more than 30 universities launched new design ethics courses. Columbia, Howard, Berkeley, Georgia Tech, MIT updated curriculum to include case studies on racial bias in public spaces, architectural gatekeeping, and the social consequences of exclusionary design. At Harvard's Graduate School of Design, they named a lecture series after her designing dignity, the Selena Brooks Forum on Equity in Urban Futures. Selena was invited to teach. She declined. "I'm not ready to stand at the front of the class," she said, "but I'll sit in the back and take notes." That was her style, never seeking the spotlight, but always being the brightest voice in the room when she chose to speak. At Eclipse Tower, the transformation was physical. By the time it opened, the building had become more than a marvel of engineering. It was a case study in inclusive space. The upper floors, originally reserved for luxury firms, were now shared with emerging nonprofits working on urban equity, climate resilience, and housing reform. Selena insisted that the top floor, the symbolic pinnacle, be given to the 2A Foundation for free. It would serve as headquarters, training center, and mentorship incubator for students across the country. Visitors didn't just see the skyline, they learned how to reshape it. The design of the tower was updated in one key area after the flight incident, the public plaza. Originally conceived as an elegant courtyard with sculptural benches and a minimalist fountain, it was reimagined as a storytelling space. Inlaid into the ground was a winding metal ribbon, etched with over 200 short quotes each from a voice previously silenced. At the center, one sentence set in brushed brass: "Dignity is not optional, no name, no attribution, just truth." The media continued to follow Selena, sometimes gently, sometimes aggressively. They called her the reluctant reformer, the woman who refused to shrink, the new face of urban justice. But she kept her focus: narrow design that served dignity. She turned down book deals, declined to host a docuseries, ignored dozens of interviews. But one day she sat down for a single profile, The New Yorker. In a quiet cafe on the Lower East Side, the reporter asked, "What do you think people get wrong about your story?" Selena stirred her coffee. They think the flight was the beginning, she said. But the fight started long before that. And it's not just mine. She looked out the window. People think I'm brave for not moving. But the real question is, why was it brave at all? In Atlanta, city planners began reevaluating their zoning codes. They'd watched Selena's forum speech and realized how deeply their own development history mirrored the power structures she condemned. They called her, invited her to consult. I don't work for cities, she said, but I'll walk through them with you. For the next year, Selena helped revise community engagement protocols in 4 cities: Atlanta, Baltimore, Minneapolis, and Oakland. She insisted on 2 things: listening sessions held in neighborhood laundromats, churches, and bus stops, translating every planning document into the 5 most spoken languages in the community. No jargon, no renderings that look like tech campuses, just real talk. And it worked. Local leaders reported higher turnout at zoning forums, more trust, less protest. When people saw themselves reflected in the plans, they showed up to shape them. Selena's design philosophy became known as soft power architecture, not because it lacked strength, but because it honored the strength of others. In the private sector, changes kept unfolding. The architecture firm that once passed over Selena for promotion years before she joined Halden, Gray, released a public apology. It wasn't performative, it was transformative. The entire leadership team stepped down. Their new CEO, a 39-year-old Mexican-American woman named Yasmin Cortizone, of Selena's former interns. Yasmin invited Selena to their relaunch party. She showed up quietly, didn't speak. But when Yasmin toasted the woman who changed my ceiling into a floor, Selena stood, placed her hand on her heart, and nodded. Even the airline industry shifted. Global Airways launched a new customer care model titled the Seat Standard, named after the infamous 2A incident. It included bias training, an anonymous incident reporting app, and a system of reverse escalation. Flight crews were now instructed to begin by protecting the rights of the passenger in the correct seat, not the louder one. Passenger satisfaction jumped, complaints dropped, and Selena's father, David Brooks, stepped down as CEO a year later, not because of scandal, but because he said the job is done. My daughter took it further than I ever could. Years passed. Selena continued her work quietly. The 2A Foundation grew. The Eclipse Tower became a hub for equity summits. She mentored hundreds of students, most of whom now led their own firms, nonprofits, or city projects. In one of her rare public letters, she wrote, I never wanted to be the face of anything, but if my name opens doors, it'll hold them open. Not forever, just long enough for someone else to walk through and build their own. At age 39, Selena received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, not for design, but for redefining dignity in the American experience. As she accepted it, she told a story. I was once asked how I wanted to be remembered. I used to say as a builder, but now I think I'd just like to be remembered as someone who reminded the world what should never have been forgotten in the first place. She paused. That every person, every seat, every floor, every voice matters. It had been almost 5 years since that flight. 5 years since she refused to move. 5 years since the world decided her name meant more than a woman in seat 2A. Selena Brooks was now a landmark in the American moral landscape. But lately she found herself asking, whose landscape was she standing on? The answer wasn't as simple as it used to be. She now woke up to calendars curated by staff. Her inboxes were filtered by assistants. Her name was attached to buildings, policies, and scholarships across the country. Everywhere she went, whether a college auditorium in Iowa or a UN panel in Geneva, people didn't just look at her. They looked through her, seeing something bigger than the person inside. That's what icons are, mirrors. And it was starting to feel like she couldn't find her own reflection anymore. One rainy morning in March, Selena found herself alone on the southern edge of Prospect Park in Brooklyn. She had left her phone at home. No entourage, no driver, just a raincoat, headphones, and time. She walked slowly past the benches, watching 2 boys argue over a soccer ball, their laughter breaking through the drizzle. She stopped at the small lake where turtles used to sunbathe. She used to sit here back when she was in grad school, sketching ideas on napkins. That was before fame, before viral videos, before the Selena standard. She missed it, the simplicity, missed choosing silence, missed sketching for joy instead of justice. That night, a knock on her door interrupted her solitude. Her longtime friend and strategist, Maya Talbot, stood outside, umbrella in hand. Maya didn't waste time. There's something you need to see. She handed Selena a folder. Inside was a proposal, a formal invitation. Not from a board, not from a university. From the Coalition for Urban Renewal and Justicia National Political PS, backed by major donors, activists, and former mayors. They wanted Selena to run for public office, specifically senator for the state of New York. Selena closed the folder. No, she said. Maya didn't flinch. You haven't even read the full plan. I don't need to, Selena replied. That's not who I am. You said the same thing about giving speeches, about founding a nonprofit, about testifying before Congress. And yeah, there you are. This is different, Selena said. That's a world I can't control. No, Maya said gently. That's a world you can rebuild, just like you've always done. For weeks, Selena didn't give an answer, but the question wouldn't go away. Not when she turned on the news and saw communities still redlined. Not when she read the hate mail buried beneath the praise. Not when a 12-year-old girl at a conference said, "One day I want to be the kind of leader you are quiet but powerful." How do you walk away from that? How do you choose peace when the world is still at war with itself? She retreated to her home in the Hudson Valley, a glass house nestled in a grove of birches. Designed by her. Built by students from the 2A Foundation. It was the only place where she still felt anonymous. She sat on the deck, notebook in lap, staring at the fog drifting over the river. What would her life look like if she stepped back? Would people let her? Would she let herself? One night, David Brooks, her father, now fully retired, came to visit. He brought a bottle of wine, 2 glasses, and no pretense. They sat by the fire, watching embers pulse. You know, he said, when you were 5, you used to rearrange all your building blocks into little cities. But you never let me help, Selena laughed. That sounds right. You said, Daddy, my city isn't real if someone else makes the rules. She nodded slowly. That still feels true. So maybe David said it's time you make the rules. She looked at him, eyes weary but curious. Would you think less of me if I said no? I'd think more of you, he said without hesitation. Why? Because choosing yourself in a world that's addicted to your sacrifice, that's the bravest kind of leadership. The next morning, she wrote 2 letters. One to the coalition, I respectfully decline. My role is to inspire action, not govern it. And one to herself. You do not owe the world your exhaustion. You do not need to lead forever to leave a legacy. You are allowed to rest without guilt, without explanation. You are not walking away, you are walking home. Selena didn't disappear. She reemerged on her own terms. She shifted her role from activist to architect in residence at a new interdisciplinary center at NYU. There she taught 1 class per semester, ethics in space. No cameras, no viral speeches, just 30 students and the sound of pencils on paper. She walked the city again unnoticed, unburdened. She traveled to Copenhagen to study accessible housing. She took a sabbatical in Kyoto, sketching temples in silence. She reconnected with old friends, cooked more, painted badly, laughed more freely, and most of all, she lived as herself. Not as a symbol, not as a mirror, as Selena. And yet her presence still moved systems. When she published a collection of essays titled Blueprints of the Invisible, it became an instant bestseller, not because of fame, but because it felt true. The final essay ended with, I didn't change the world, but I helped some people believe it was worth building again. And for me, that is enough. Years later, at a dedication ceremony for the new Equity and Design Wing at the Smithsonian, she was asked if she would accept a permanent exhibit about her life. She hesitated, then said yes, but only under one condition. Don't make it about me. Make it about what came after me. Make it about the voices that finally got heard, the cities that were redesigned, the students who now lead. Let my story end, so theirs can begin. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, lining the stone path that led to the newly unveiled Selena Brooks Center for Civic Design and Human Equity, nestled on the outskirts of Georgetown University. It was an overcast morning in early spring, and the air smelled of wet earth and daffodils just beginning to bloom. The ceremony was understated, just the way Selena had requested. No press, no grand speeches, just students, faculty, community leaders, and a few familiar faces from the journey that had shaped a decade of change. Selena arrived alone wearing a navy coat and soft leather shoes. She walked with purpose, though slower now. Not from age or fatigue, but from clarity. Every step meant something. Every detail, every corner of this space had passed through her hands or her spirit at some point in the past 10 years. She wasn't here to speak. She was here to witness. Inside, a group of students, diverse in every way imaginable, were setting up a rotating exhibit in the main atrium. It was titled "The Spaces That Made Us." One wall featured murals of neighborhoods reclaimed from decay. Another showed bridges and parks co-designed with local youth. A third highlighted subway stations redesigned for accessibility projects, all inspired by the principles Selena had quietly embedded into modern planning, inclusion, beauty, and responsibility. She stood before a quote etched in stone beneath a skylight. "The opposite of exclusion is an access seats belonging." She remembered writing that in a journal during her Kyoto sabbatical. She never published it, but someone had found it, and now it was permanent. A voice called out gently behind her. "Ms. Brooks." Selena turned. A young woman with a badge that read Ayla Chen Program Director stood smiling, holding a clipboard and a pen stained with ink. "I didn't think you'd come," Ayla said softly. "I almost didn't," Selena replied. "But then I realized I didn't want to miss what comes next." Ayla nodded. "We named the building after you, but we're not building you a shrine. We're building a platform, one that helps us ask better questions." Selena smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." As the guests gathered for a small toast under the glass roof, one of the students, barely 19, stepped up and recited something unexpected. It wasn't a speech, it was a poem, written in response to the question, "What did Selena Brooks teach you?" The final line hung in the air like the last note of a gospel hymn. "She didn't draw the map. She taught us how to hold the pen." There were no tears from Selena, just stillness, the kind that only comes when a circle is finally complete. Later, as the sun broke through the clouds, Selena walked through the garden path outside the center. No one followed. She preferred it that way. She reached a stone bench facing a small reflecting pool and sat down. For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly, almost to herself, she whispered, "This is enough." She meant the building. The lives changed. The battles fought. The ones she let go. The legacy she never chased but somehow still left. Not because she planned it, but because she lived it. Some say influence is about how many people know your name. Selena Brooks showed the world something else. True legacy is measured not in who remembers you, but in how many no longer need to. In a world that often moves too fast and forgets too easily, the story of Selena Brooks reminds us of the enduring power of dignity, quiet courage, and purposeful design, not only in buildings, but in how we choose to live and lead. Her journey began not with ambition for fame or power, but with a simple refusal to be displaced, to be erased. She chose to stay seated in a space she rightfully earned, and in doing so, she stood up for something much larger than herself. For older adults who have witnessed decades of societal change, Selena's story carries a powerful reflection. Progress is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives in silence and poise, in the calm assertion of, "I belong here." It challenges us to ask, how often have we seen injustice, but stayed silent? How often have we been the ones who turned away? Selena did not become a leader because she sought attention. She became one because she lived with clarity, integrity, and vision. Her influence rippled not through force, but through example. From boardrooms to classrooms, from city halls to construction sites, her principles transformed how others saw design, leadership, and inclusion. She reminded institutions that excellence and equity are not opposing forces, they are partners. But perhaps the greatest lesson she left us is this: legacy is not about being remembered. It's about what continues to live on when you're no longer in the room. Selena knew when to speak and when to step back. She knew that rest is not weakness, that saying no can be a moral act, and that letting others lead is sometimes the most generous form of guidance. For those of us in our later years, her story invites us to reflect on what we leave behind, not in wealth or reputation, but in the doors we've opened for others. It encourages us to believe that it's never too late to insist on fairness, to teach by presence, or to quietly rebuild the world, not with noise, but with meaning. Because as Selena proved, dignity is not optional. And building something that lasts, whether a structure or a standard, starts with believing that every person in every space matters. Now that you've seen Selena's journey from injustice to impact, from a quiet refusal to a nationwide movement, what do you think she should do next? Should she return to teaching full-time? Should she mentor the next generation in communities that need her most? Or perhaps, should she keep her quiet influence behind the scenes, shaping policies through others? If Selena's story moved you, if her dignity, her strength, and her vision made you proud, take a moment to let her know. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your hopes, or even a message to Selena herself. What would you say to a woman who redefined leadership by staying seated? And if you believe Selena deserves our support, our gratitude, and our voice, please comment the number 1 below. It's a small gesture, but one that says, "We see you, we stand with you. We won't let your legacy fade." Thank you for watching. Let's keep building something better together.